As the temps start rising, I feel the familiar urge to refresh my closet, but I don't want to waste money on pieces I'll only wear once or for just one season. Thankfully, Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. The best part is that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes, so you get to look good while feeling good. I'm pretty excited that I have upgraded my athleisure wardrobe for this summer. I bought a sweatshirt and a pair of wide-leg flow pants that are two of the softest items I own, and I plan to live in them. So join me in giving your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
What are the very most powerful questions that you can ask depending on what it is that you're trying to learn? And I distinguish those quality questions from what I call crummy questions. And the distinction really is a quality question is a question that helps us learn something important from the other person. Lots of people are sitting around with all kinds of brilliant ideas and genius in their minds that they don't know if you want to know. And so I just think that teams and organizations, and even in our personal lives, there is a huge amount of dormant genius that if we could unlock, imagine how much better off we would all be.
That was Jeff Wetzler on Psychologists Off the Clock. We are four experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas from psychology to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, and author of Act for Burnout, Act Daily Journal, and the Act Daily Card Deck.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Edlin, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and author of an upcoming book on being a better conversationalist and making friends.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock.
Hi, everyone. This is Debbie. It's my delight to bring you today an interview with Jeff Wetzler about the importance of asking questions in order to connect with people and tap into their wisdom in a way that you might not be. And I'm here with Michael today to introduce this conversation. Let me kick it over to you, Michael, so you can start us off with some of your thoughts.
Oh, yeah. So for me, there's a lot of power in storytelling. I think if we as humans were all better at telling great stories and bringing the other person in, we'd spend a lot more talking and we would spend a lot less time in front of the TV, and instead we'd chat with our neighbor. And what your interview showed me is that while storytelling might be the yin, the asking the better question is kind of the counterpart to it, is the yang. Because if I can go out there and I can ask really good questions, then I'm getting the stories from people. Then I hear what they're thinking, how they're feeling, what they thought about this trip, what, all the good and juicy stuff. Because if we're honest, a lot of the talking that we do is incredibly superficial. Hey, how are you? Great. How are you? Great. Well, that didn't go well, but learn to tell better stories, learn to ask better questions. And now we're suddenly connecting on a much deeper level.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And there's something else. Like he mentioned so many good points in the interview, but one that stood out for me a lot because it's something that I see a lot during my workshops on vulnerability, on small talk, on more meaningful conversations, is that we underestimate how much another person is willing to share about sensitive topics, sensitive questions. And we think, oh, we can't ask that. That's probing a little bit too much. But then we find out, no, the person is actually like super happy to talk about this and is actually appreciative of the fact that someone asked that question. And I think that was just such a big takeaway.
Well, there's something that he shares in the book and also a little bit in the interview that really stuck out to me along those lines, which is how often we've had that feeling of being either in a one-on-one conversation or in a group, and we have a point of view, or we have an opinion, or we have a story to tell, but we don't have the space to, or we're not sure. We're trying to gauge the situation. Like, should I share this or not? And maybe we kind of want to, but we're a little hesitant. And then the conversation moves on and we never have the space to. I've been in that situation many times. I'm sure most people know what I'm talking about here. And if only someone would have asked and maybe they didn't think of it, or maybe they weren't sure if they were, like you said, they're worried that they're prying too much. I would have absolutely loved to have a chance to speak up. And so absolutely. And we're missing that sometimes. And I think this is one of the major points he makes, which is sometimes there's something valuable in that. Sometimes it's just, you have a story to tell and it's not anything major, but there are times when we miss a point of view or a perspective because we just don't slow down enough to check in.
So on a little bit of a tangent, I've been for years teaching questions that kind of work in a lot of situations. So they're kind of my blueprint go-to questions when regular old small talk starts to connect to people a little bit more. And we want to leave like the small talk topics and go a little bit more personal. But of course, if you go from small talk to more personal, you don't want to jump like right into the deep end. You want to like transition over and see how that goes. So two of my absolute favorite go-to questions are, what do you like most about it? So we might have a conversation, Debbie, where we meet at a cocktail party and I would ask you, what do you do for work? And you say, well, blah, blah, blah. And then I would say, well, I could say, well, that's interesting. Or, I'm a coach. Or I could say, hey, what do you like most about it? And you would be surprised how people react to it, because you can ask, someone about their job. And the moment you ask them what they like most about it, they don't know the answer to that, which is the most powerful question you can ask. And people, you will always, like, everyone reports back when they try that out, is that I asked the question and the person was like blinking for a second or two. And then the smile went up on their face and they said, well, what I like most about being an accountant or living in Denver is this and this and this. And another go-to question is, what's the funniest thing that ever happened doing ... which has the same result.
Oh, I love those because they're both, it's like you're saying, they're beyond small talk, beyond, how are you? Fine. What do you do? Blah, blah, blah. Well, how's the weather? But they're also not, you're not going immediately in for someone's deepest, darkest secret.
Yeah. What's your biggest fear, Debbie? Now that we established that you're
what's the worst thing you ever did?
Yes.
It's not like that. It's a gentle, but it does get
it
people,
opens the door.
like that. It
opens the door. Yeah.
And you could imagine them responding, because I think often we're testing the waters with someone we're talking to if we don't know them well, to see, how's this person going to respond? Are they open? Are they going to be reciprocal? Are they going to...
Exactly.
And it's a way to kind of test the waters to see if this is someone you can get to know better. And
that
sometimes
wants
you
to
don't.
take the conversation to the next level, which is a little bit more, okay, let's stop talking about the weather and let's talk about something more personal. Do you want to go there?
Yeah.
By asking that question, I am already putting forward a little bit of vulnerability because I'm signaling interest in a more personal connection. And the other person displays the vulnerability in a homeopathic dose by replying to the question or not. And if they don't, or they give me a terse answer about it, then I know, okay, this is not where this conversation is going.
It's always fascinating to me. There are people you see all the time, but you never get past that small talk level. And there are people you meet and you go so quickly into that and you just connect really easily. And of course, sometimes it takes time, but it is interesting how some people we kind of connect with more easily than others.
Yeah. And you can talk to someone every day for 10 years and not know them.
Right.
That's the power of questions.
Yeah. Well, everyone, I had a few aha moments during this conversation and when I was reading Jeff's book, and I hope that you have a similar experience as you listen to this interview. Jeff Wetzler is co-CEO of Transcend, a nationally recognized innovation organization and an expert in learning and human potential. He has more than 25 years of experience in business and education as a management consultant to the world's top corporations, a learning facilitator for leaders around the world, and as Chief Learning Officer at Teach for America. Jeff has a doctorate in adult learning and leadership from Columbia University and a bachelor's in psychology from Brown University. His new book is called Ask, Tap into the Hidden Wisdom of People Around You for Unexpected Breakthroughs in Leadership and Life. Jeff, welcome. We're so happy to have you here.
Oh, it's great to be with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. And I love your book. We'll get into why as we go. I think listeners will get a sense of that. But just to kind of frame the conversation, your book is really about the valuable information we can get from other people that sometimes can be hard to get from people, so we have to ask for it. And so I want to start with a two-part question for you. The first part is, can you tell us what we are missing out on if we don't think to ask people questions?
Absolutely. At the highest level, the people around us are just filled with ideas, insights, life experiences, stories, perspectives, feedback for us. All of that stuff, in my experience, is just like a gold mine of value that we're missing out on if they don't tell us, which they often don't do if we don't ask the right questions in the right ways. In particular, in the book, I look at what are some of the top things that people withhold from us. What are the patterns that we see? One of them includes really challenges and struggles that they're facing. So if I'm a manager and somebody on my team is dealing with some kind of challenge, whether maybe they're feeling some version of imposter syndrome, like, do I really belong here? Or maybe there's just something very tactical at the work level that is getting in their way. If they are not telling me that, I can't help them. And the work suffers, our relationships can suffer, their experience suffers, etc. So that's one category.
They might leave, right?
They might leave. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that it doesn't have to just be work. That could be, what if my daughter is struggling with something? So it applies in all realms of life. One other example of a common pattern is people's observations of us and feedback that they have for us. And so people have lots of thoughts on how we could do better, and they have lots of coaching that they could give us. And quite often they don't know that we want that or need that or welcome that. They might think we need it, but they don't know if we want it. And if we don't ask for it, there's a lot that we're leaving on the table in terms of how we could raise our own game and get better. So those are two examples.
Yeah. So, and even just that alone was a really important thing to think about, I think, as I read your book, was that there is all this information, this potential there that as you say in the title of your book, it's kind of hidden wisdom. It's untapped sometimes if we don't find a way to access it.
Exactly.
So part two of the question then is, what can be gained by asking good questions? How does that benefit us at work and in life in general?
Yeah, I think it boils down to two things: results and relationships. So on the results side, if we can find out what someone's up against and what they're struggling with, what their best ideas are, what their feedback is for us, really what their experience is, we make better decisions together. We collaborate better. We innovate better together. We save time. We avoid mistakes that maybe they knew that we were going to make if we didn't find out. So results can just be radically better if they are informed by the insights of people around us. But I would say equally important is relationships. When we are in a relationship with someone and they are not telling us what they really think and feel, that's a barrier. It's a barrier to their own self-expression. It's a barrier to open dialogue between the two of us. And so when we actually make it easier and enable someone to actually share what they're really thinking and feeling, we become closer as a result in our relationship. We're deeper in our partnership. And that alone, I think, is an end in of itself that's super valuable.
Yeah, I can build those bonds and bring closeness. And there's really two sides of this equation, right? There's the side of the person who have the information that's not being shared.
Yep.
And then the side of the person who's potentially asking or wanting that information. And I kind of want to address both sides, but starting with the person who's not sharing.
Yes.
or who could potentially share. We talked a little bit about some of the kinds of information that people might withhold. Let's talk about why people withhold this information. Like, what makes that challenging?
Yes. And it's something I think that we all do in different circumstances. And so we could be talking about the other person, or we could be talking about ourselves as well. In researching the book, the number one barrier that holds the other people or ourselves back from sharing is a fear of the impact of what's going to happen if I share that. What impact will it have on the other person? Will they feel hurt? Will they feel angry? But also, what impact will it have on me? Are they going to punish me? Are they going to take it out on me? Or is it going to expose something about myself? Or what's the impact that it has on our relationship? Is it going to create tension in our relationship? Is it going to draw us further apart? And so a whole range of different fears, basically of some kind of negative impact if someone were to say something that they're thinking and feeling privately. That's one category of barrier. A second category, which I think is really interesting, is they may just not know that we're interested to find out what they have to say. If we aren't actually demonstrating to them through a question or some other way that we value what they have to say, they may just think we don't care, or it may not even occur to them that they have something valuable to offer to us as well. So that's a second. And then I'll just say one third one. There's more in the book, but people may not have the words to say it. It can be hard to say things in constructive ways, and they may be thinking, well, if I say what I'm really thinking and feeling, it's going to make it worse. And they could be right. And they may not actually know what constructive words to actually put to it. They may not have the skill, or it may just be a gut intuition that they have that they don't know how to translate into words. There's also another kind of mathematical reason around not having the words for it, which is that I learned this in researching the book. People have on average 900 words per minute going through their thoughts. But the little straw of our mouths can only get out about 125 words per minute. So that means we're really only hearing in any given minute 14% of what's going through someone's head. Not for any malicious reason. It's just the math doesn't work out any better than that. And so there's a lot going on that we don't hear just for that reason as well.
Mm-hmm. We're thinking faster than we're speaking. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, as I was reading, I was thinking about my own experience, because as you said, we've all, I'm sure, had this experience where we had a thought or an idea or something and held back. And I think this is along the lines of what you're already saying. Definitely not wanting to hurt people's feelings. I think I often am worried that people will be defensive, or they'll react, they'll get mad, they don't want to hear it, or they're so caught up in their own stuff that they just can't hear it. And I don't know if I'm right or not. I mean, sometimes I think I am, though. I can think of certain situations where I was like, I know if I say something, this person's going to shut me down or something. Yes. And so I'm just, I don't know, is that something that
I think that's
similar?
A perfect example of fearing the impact of what you would say. And you're fearing that the impact is that they could get defensive, or that they could shut down, or have a certain kind of reaction. So I think that's, that's very common. And that's one of the reasons why people don't share with us, because they might be fearing that same reaction in us.
Which I think goes to show, and we'll talk about this later, how one of the things that you can do on the other end is to not display that defensive reaction or that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that in a minute, because I think that's one of the keys here, is fostering that sense of like, okay, I know this person can handle it. They're going to be receptive, right?
That's exactly right. And there's lots of good books out there that I think, including things like Radical Candor, that offer people guidance on how to share more and how to not withhold. And this is really a book on the other side of that exchange, which is if you're the receiver and you want to know more what someone's thinking and feeling, this is how you can make it easier for people to do that and share that with you.
Hey, Michael here. As you might have already heard, I'm currently working on a book on confidence building, having better conversations, and making friends. Would you like to work with me to make this happen? I don't know about you, but I like self-development books that aren't just about the theory and the exercises. I like books that are full of real stories and insights from people who have worked through the concepts and have gotten the results they wanted. And that's how I envision my book too. So I'm looking for a handful of coaching clients to work with me over the next couple of weeks. If you struggle with confidence or your social skills, we can work together for 8 weeks in one-on-one coaching sessions that are tailored towards your specific goals. And your story will, anonymously, of course, be featured in my book and help and inspire others. I'm only going to work on this with 10 people, and as a thank you, offer 50% off my coaching package. If you think this is for you, then head over to herald.coach/book and apply. That's all. Back to the show.
So here's the moment I had mentioned before we started that there was a moment, it was kind of one of those like, aha, like my head's about to explode moment when I was reading, which is that I do assertive communication work with my clients a lot. And I'm trying to teach them this skill. I work on it in my own life too. You know, sometimes I'm struggling myself with assertive communication. But I think by looking at the flip side, what I realized is that sometimes there's a little bit of a blame the victim scenario going on here. So again, going back to my own experience, I think I always, when I get passive with communication, I kind of think, oh, I'm just being a people pleaser. I'm kind of wimping out here, or, you know, I'm being too passive. But I actually think that sometimes it's happening in a context where the other person is making it really, really hard to speak up. And I think that really needs to be acknowledged. And I'm going to start acknowledging that more with my clients. Right?
Yes.
So what do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why if we are on the receiving side, we have to understand that there are barriers to people sharing with us. And one of the practices in the Ask approach is called Make It Safe. And that's all about essentially paving the road in gold so that it's very easy and appealing for other people to want to do that. And I think a lot of people don't pave the road in gold, don't make it safe, and in fact, do the opposite in terms of putting up even more barriers. And I can imagine that really does contribute to someone who's potentially trying to be more assertive, feeling that that's very challenging.
So this might be a hard question, but if someone was on that end of potentially wanting to speak up, but they did not feel safe, do you have any guidance or any advice for how to navigate that? If they think, I really want to say this thing, but I know that it's going to lead to a big fight or something, or I'm afraid of that, what would you say to that person?
I mean, I think it obviously depends on the scenario, and there's all kinds of reasons why someone might not feel safe, including very, real stakes that could be at play for someone, whether physically not safe or emotionally not safe, etc. And so I don't know that this guidance is universally applicable. But one thought is to ask the question, is to say, I have something, I have an observation, I have a need, I have etc. Are you interested in hearing that? Are you open to hearing that? And oftentimes, I think people will be surprised by the answer that they get. They may be assuming that the other person doesn't want to hear it, when that other person might not even realize that that they have that to say. And so they could test it. And if they get a no, then at least they know. But if they get a yes, then the door is open a little bit more.
Yeah, they're getting a little bit of consent, and
exactly
maybe that alone will help the person kind of be a little bit more open to hearing it instead of just, I like that. But I think you're right. And this is a very good point around, sometimes it's a wise choice not to say something. If you are in a situation where it's going to cause you a major problem, I mean, I think you have to sometimes choose your battles, so to speak.
Absolutely.
In the sense of, sometimes just not saying something is an okay thing to do.
Yes. And, that plays out across lines of power and lines of difference and race and gender and identity on many different markers. And so I wouldn't encourage any blanket, like just say what you're thinking based on that. People really have to make judgments. But that's also why I really focused the book on the other half of that equation, which is on the receiver of it, to try to make it easier for people to do that.
Okay, which I want to talk about, but let's actually address that power dynamic thing a little bit more first.
Yes.
I'm going to read you a quote from your book, which was, people receive cultural messages all the time about whose input is valued and whose is not. So would you mind saying a little bit more about how power dynamics play into this?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So anytime there is, in an organizational setting, formal hierarchical power, there are real stakes involved. The person with more power can choose to give someone a promotion or not, choose to fire them or not, choose to make them, give them resources or not, etc. And the person who is deciding, do I share something or not, is aware of that. And typically the greater the difference in hierarchical power or authority, the more the person who has that power needs to work hard to make it safe for the other person to actually share. There's also societal messages that have been sent to women, people of color, other marginalized groups that essentially say, in some cases, it's a real threat if you're going to speak up, whether that's a physical threat or an emotional threat, or just simply say, we're not going to believe you if you speak up, or may say, we just don't value your voice as much. And when those messages get internalized, that just contributes to the barriers that people can feel, which means we have to work all the harder to make it safe and appealing for people to share. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important to acknowledge. And I think back to this idea of the untapped wisdom that's out there. If you think about who stays silent for those types of reasons and what the world is missing by not hearing those points of view, right?
Yes. So absolutely. Whole groups of people who have so much to contribute that we are not benefiting from that genius that could make their organizations, their relationships, our society better, richer, stronger, healthier, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so let's flip from talking about what gets in the way of speaking up to talking about what gets in the way of asking questions. And it is true that being on the other end of things can also be difficult, right? Sometimes asking these kinds of questions, receiving feedback, potentially critical feedback, or even just having the guts to ask can be difficult too. What gets in the way on that side, do you think?
Yeah, a whole bunch of things. I would say the first thing that gets in the way of asking is we're often not curious. It doesn't even occur to us to ask because it doesn't occur to us that there is something for us to learn from the other person. So often we walk around the world, as you know, experiencing and perceiving reality in front of us through the filters of our assumptions and biases and life experiences, etc. And when we do that, we so often just pick a very tiny slice of what we see and just zero in on that part. Usually that choice of what to focus in on is already filtered by what we know and believe already. And then we tell ourselves stories that confirm what we knew and believed already. And pretty soon you basically get just a sense of like, this is how the world is. Here we go again. And I call it in the book, the certainty loop that we get stuck in. And so if we're trapped in that, it just wouldn't even occur to us to ask a question. I would say that is one. A second reason is, and you alluded to this, people sometimes are hesitant to ask questions because they think that the questions are too sensitive. Maybe this question is going to put somebody else on the spot. Maybe this question is going to embarrass them, or maybe it's just going to be too personal, etc. And there's some really interesting psychology research which talks about how we often overestimate the other person's unwillingness to answer a question. And in fact, quite often when we ask a question that we think is sensitive, the other person appreciates that question because they actually want to be understood. That doesn't mean that we need to impose those questions, and there's ways to ask them that give people a chance to regulate their boundaries and so on. But that's another barrier to asking questions. And then I think a third one is we just don't get trained on how to ask good questions. It's a skill set, just like any other skill set, whether that's, something technical or playing a sport, etc. And just because we have lived in the world with other people asking questions, that doesn't mean we have the right repertoire of knowing what questions to ask. So I would say those are some of the barriers.
Yeah, it's funny because as I was reading, here I am preparing questions just to ask you today. And then I get to chapter 5, which is called Pose Quality Questions. And I was like, I'm going to ask questions of someone who wrote the book on how to write good questions and
or
how to ask good questions. And I'm like, okay, no pressure here. But it actually just made me think about that, how even for all the interviews I do, but I mean, interviews is a very specific context. That's not really what you're writing about. But there is a little bit of a similarity there. It's like,
absolutely, you're trying to learn something from the person you're interviewing.
Yeah. And it's same in clinical work and in the teams I'm on and that kind of, and with my kids, of course, it's like all these different, but there is something about it. It's a skill. It sometimes is a little, you just don't know how the person's going to respond. You're trying to help them feel comfortable. There's just so many different levels to think about when it comes to this. It was a reminder to me of how hard this actually.
Yeah. But also how, when we know those questions, how much more we can unlock from people as well.
That's right. Yep. See, I'm getting your wisdom. I'm unlocking your wisdom here.
Exactly.
Question, so it's worth it. I also thought it was so sweet in the book when you told a story about when you were young and that you would have loved people to ask you more questions.
It's true.
Can you tell that story?
Sometimes I feel that way even still now. But I think many people do. When I was growing up, I lived in a town where I didn't always feel psychologically safe. And I felt a little bit like an outsider. And there weren't a lot of people in my town who shared my religious background. And I even experienced some overt and subtle signals that sort of said you're not safe. And my way of dealing with it was to keep my mouth shut, because it felt easy. It felt safer to me to observe and ask questions than to announce my own opinion, because I didn't know how someone else would react in doing that. And after a while, when you start to behave that way and that's your coping mechanism, it kind of becomes a habit and even a muscle that you build. And so I did wish more people would ask me questions, and I had things I wanted to say and share, but it also helped me realize, other people probably do too. And there's a lot, if I have all this going on inside my head that I wish I could share, imagine what everyone else has going on inside their head as well. And so in some ways, sometimes the challenges that we have in life and growing up can turn into an asset. And I think I'm hoping that it can be a contribution I can make as well.
Yeah, I think it is.
Thank you.
So Jeff, you came up with the ask approach, which is really grounded in all these years of you've been doing work in education and in the corporate world. And it's a really nice framework, I think, for getting better at this skill set. Can you walk us through kind of a high level overview of your approach, which is called the ask approach, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So the ask approach is a combination of 5 powerful practices that together really help us tap into other people's knowledge, thoughts, wisdom, ideas. The first one is called choose curiosity. And this is really about awakening our own consciousness to the possibility that we can learn from other people. It's reminding ourselves that every single person has something to teach us. And it's injecting question marks into the certainty that we might otherwise have about the world. So that's number one. Second one really deals with a lot of what we've been talking about so far in this conversation around people's fears about sharing what they have to say. And it's called Make It Safe. And Make It Safe is all about lowering those barriers. It's about helping other people feel more comfortable, feel more at ease, feel more safe, and even feel more interested in telling us their truth, especially when it feels like it might be a hard truth to communicate. Third one is called Pose Quality Questions. And this is really about expanding the repertoire of questions that we have so that we can understand what are different questions that we can pose that can help us get at other people's ideas, feedback, where their beliefs come from, observations for us, etc. And so in this chapter, I really lay out what are the very most powerful questions that you can ask depending on what it is that you're trying to learn. And I distinguish those quality questions from what I call crummy questions. And the distinction really is a quality question is a question that helps us learn something important from the other person. The fourth practice is called listening to learn. And so many of us think we're good at listening, but there is a difference between listening and really hearing what's most important for someone. And listening to learn is really about expanding the channels of information that we hear from people. It's not just the content that they have to say, but it's also the emotion that they're conveying and displaying. And it's also the actions that they're taking in the conversation. And so this practice is all about expanding that and really opening ourselves up to hear what is most essential that someone is saying to us and also what they're not saying to us as well. The last practice, which is my favorite, is called reflect and reconnect. And this is really, how do we take everything that we've just heard and process it? How can we sift out what's important and let go of what's not important? And then for the important stuff, how can we actually convert it into real insight that we can grow from and action that we can move on? So it's not just a conversation. But the most important part, I think, is not just doing that reflection, but reconnecting with the other person. and going back and saying to them, thank you for what you shared with me. And here's how it changed me. And here's what I'm going to do about it. And that not only helps the other person know that they didn't waste their time, it also gives them a chance to correct and nuance our takeaways if we processed it in ways that they didn't intend. And I think it also really increases the odds that they will be interested in continuing to share with us over time because they know how seriously we took them.
Right. Reinforces that. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I want to dive into a couple questions I have about some of these specific elements that you have written about. And of course, people can check out your book to learn more because there's a lot of detail, including a lot of very specific guidance and just more depth in terms of, how to do this effectively. But for today, there are a couple things that really stood out to me that I just want to pick your brain on. Starting, we've talked several times already about making it safe and how to get people to be more open. In the book, you wrote about how sometimes actually being asked to share something can be uncomfortable for people, right? It puts them on the spot. It can feel, all kinds of stuff can show up for people emotionally when they're in that situation. So what are some examples that you've seen of how people can be really effective at making it safer? And I know you've been doing this work for a long time, so you probably have so many examples, but like what does put people a little bit more at ease here specifically?
Yes. And I'll say, I learned this the hard way because in various roles that I had, I thought I was curious and I thought I was asking good questions and I still wasn't hearing the full truth. And I didn't realize at the time how much more I needed to do to actually make it safe for people. And so this is really, personal for me and something that I'm, that I'm continuing to learn about as well. But there's really 3 strategies that I think are incredibly important in doing this. One is being very conscious of the connection that we have with the other person. And that even can be about the where and how and when we connect with that person. So in researching the book, I spoke to some iconic CEOs, like CEOs of companies like Kraft and Medtronic, and they talked very consistently about if they wanted to find out truly what was going on in their organizations, and CEOs are notorious for not getting all the information, but if they really wanted to find out what's going on, they had to remove barriers. So Bill George from Medtronic said, I would never sit across the CEO desk from someone and assume that they're going to feel safe telling me. We're going to go for a walk. We're going to sit on a couch together. We're going to do those kinds of things. Or Irene Rosenfeld from Kraft would say things like, I'm going to eat in the cafeteria with everybody, and I'm going to ride along with the salespeople in their cars. And in my own life, I see it even with my teenage daughter, who will come home from school and I'll ask her, all the things I want to know about her day, and I'm going to get nothing. But if I want to really find out and have it be when she wants to do it, I got to stay up till 11:30 at night when she's done with her homework and done talking to her friends. And at that point, it all pours out. Now I'm exhausted, but if I want to learn and make it safe for her, I got to go to when and where and how she wants to do it. So that's one piece of it. The second piece of it is if I want someone else to feel safe opening up, I need to open up first. And that could be opening up even about why I'm asking the question so they don't have to guess at my agenda. Or it could be opening up about something that might feel vulnerable for me so that they can see if Jeff is doing it, then I can do that, more of that too. And the third piece I call radiate resilience. And this is about demonstrating to the other person that I'm resilient enough to handle what they have to say, that I'm not going to crumble but in what they say, based on what they say. And I'm also not going to punish them or even hold them responsible for my own emotional reactions to what they say. And the more that they feel that I'm resilient, the safer it is for them to say what they're really thinking and feeling. And there's different ways that people can do that. One, for example, is just to say, if I put myself in your shoes, I can imagine I'd be really frustrated about what's going on. Is that part of what you're feeling right now? So that if that is what they're feeling, they can see that I can handle hearing more about that. Or I have an investor who has said to me, I assume that after I make an investment, things never go the way that they were planned to go. And so I'm interested in hearing how have things gone differently than what we initially thought was going to happen. And so all of a sudden she's saying to me, she can handle hearing what I'm going to tell her because she's put it out there and made it discussable in the first place.
I love this answer. Every single example you gave, it kind of levels the playing field a little bit. It fosters openness. People don't have to be as concerned about hurting your feelings or that it's going to be this huge problem later. So those are really helpful to think about.
Great. Thank you.
What about I want to dive in more to the quality questions. And you mentioned that there are some not so good qualities, some crummy, is that right? Crummy questions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And some good questions. And again, there's more detail in your book, but what are maybe some examples or some of the features that you would describe as like either maybe not so good or better questions?
Yeah, we can start with the crummy questions.
Okay, let's start there.
One type of crummy question is what I call the clumsy question. It might actually be coming from an intention to learn, but one way a question can be clumsy if it's layered on top of 3 or 4 questions. So if I'm asking all my questions and I don't even give the other person a chance to respond one by one, then they might forget the questions. They might not know which question. I might not know which question they're actually answering. Sometimes people ask a question and then state their own view. All of that is very clumsy because it makes it very difficult for the person to have a clean window into what are they actually asking.
So I just did that, didn't I? Okay, live feedback here because I asked you kind of a 2-part. I asked about the crummy and better questions all in one.
Good point. That's a good observation. I had to distinguish, and I was able to parse it apart, but I had to work a little bit for it, and not everyone might do that work.
So thank you for the feedback.
Well, you named it yourself.
Role modeling this live here in the
self-reflection.
But okay, so you don't want it to be too complicated or to dump a ton of questions.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, another kind of clumsy question is what I call the sneaky question. And the sneaky question isn't really a question. It's more of a statement disguised as a question or advice or trying to maneuver somebody through a question. Sometimes the way we would see a lawyer asking somebody question after question to try to lead the witness to admit something or whatever. And we can do that all the time. But there can also be, even simple ones like, don't you think we should go to Chinese dinner tonight? Or, this kind of thing where it's kind of like, yeah, I'm saying what I think, even though there's a question mark at the end. And then, there's also things that, questions can be weaponized. And so there's also attack questions. What the hell were you thinking? Kind of thing. It's a question, but it's not really a question designed to learn. It's not a high quality question. So those are some examples of all what I say are crummy questions.
And that's going to evoke defensiveness pretty much no matter what, right?
Exactly.
If you go for the attack question.
Exactly.
What were you thinking? Yeah.
Attack questions lead people to feel attacked. Sneaky questions lead people to feel manipulated. And so neither of those things feels good. Neither of those things is going to really help you learn from the other person.
Okay. So what about the other side of things?
And then on the other side, quality questions, the definition of a quality question is simply it helps you learn something important from the other person. And I'll give you some examples of quality questions. One example that I think is often overlooked is a type of question that I call request reactions. This is about after we say our view or after we give someone a suggestion or whatever, it's simply saying, what's your reaction to that? How did that land with you? What did that make you think? What might I be overlooking? What's missing here from what I said? And so often, I think we assume that after we say something, if the other person has a reaction, they're going to tell us their reaction. But for all the reasons we've been talking about, they often are not going to tell us their reaction, but they probably have a reaction. And so if we want to know what their reaction is, we have to request it. We have to request reactions. I mean, I remember when I first learned this was early in my career as a manager, and I was giving somebody some direction and some guidance in terms of the work we were doing. And I thought I was clear. I thought we were good. But I thought to myself, maybe I'll just ask this question. Someone just told me I should try asking this question. And so I said to him, what's your reaction? And he said to me, honestly, it's what you just said to me is totally deflating. And I was shocked. I thought, how could he be deflated by what I just said? But he was. And had I not asked, I never would have known. But because I found out, then we were able to clear up what was the miscommunication we had earlier that led to that reaction. And we straightened things out and on we went. But I had to ask the question to find out.
And think of how helpful it was to hear that. Yeah.
Exactly. I'll give you one other example. Another one is to invite ideas. And so this is to say to somebody, It could be anything like, what ideas do you have for how I could be more effective at this? What ideas do you have for how might we solve this dilemma that we're facing? What ideas do you have for what we should do next? It could be any number of different things. And again, some people might share those ideas proactively, but lots of people are sitting around with all kinds of brilliant ideas and genius in their minds that they don't know if you want to know. And so I just think that teams and organizations, and even in our personal lives, there is a huge amount of dormant genius that if we could unlock, imagine how much better off we would all be.
Mm-hmm. That concept of growth mindset that you hear a lot these days in education and in psychology. There's such a growth mindset to that, to thinking, what could we be doing better and what other ideas are out there? And you can't implement them all, or maybe some of them won't get off the ground, but just to even have access to that takes a little bit of a mental shift, instead of just the way we've always done things, or here's how I've been thinking about this. So I think it's a kind of interesting to think about it in that way.
Absolutely. And when you do that, I have found it has a very positive effect on the other person because they feel valued, they feel empowered, they feel invested. If you actually listen to their ideas, and especially if you take any parts of those ideas, they feel like they're now part of the solution in a totally different way. I find that it just unleashes a lot of positive energy.
Yeah. I do a lot of work in burnout. And I think one of the things that we know is protective for burnout is when people feel like they have some agency and they feel like they're being appreciated and valued. And you can just imagine how much even just someone caring what you think can help with that, right? Versus feeling like, well, nobody around here cares what I think and they don't value my opinion about anything, which just feels deflating.
Totally.
Yeah.
100%.
Okay, so another area I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about is the listen to learn piece. As a therapist, we do a lot of listening in my profession, and we have, training on listening. And I love what you're saying about how it's not just the content, right? And in fact, I think sometimes actually some of the least interesting things are happening at the level of the content, right? When someone's going into detail about something, but there's so many different layers to it. And actually, I'll tell a quick story. I had a supervisor once when I was doing my internship, Rich Amodio, who was a great supervisor, and he had me watch a video of one of my sessions, but turn off the volume because I think he noticed I had to mute it. And of course I knew what the person said because I was doing the session, right. But what he was trying to get me to tap into was some of those other layers, right? Besides just the content of the words. And so I guess the question I'm trying to ask you here is, how can people get better at listening at that more nuanced way that you're describing, right? It's not just the surface level. There's a lot more to it. How might people build that skill set?
Yes. And I will say that this distinction between listening through the lens or channel of content, emotion, and action comes from the world of therapy, comes from a family systems therapist named David Cantor, who was one of the pioneers of structural dynamics. I had the great fortune of working with him for a number of years earlier in my career when he was starting to apply that work to teams and organizations. And
cool.
It was a true honor to work with him. And a little bit similar to what you just said, it can be helpful to first listen to one channel and then listen to another channel and then listen to it through another channel and see what you see if you just focus on that for a moment. Just the same way as if we were to listen to a piece of music and we're listening first for the percussion and then we're listening for the keyboard and then we're listening for the vocals, and you can appreciate it so much. And then when you get good at doing that, you can listen to all together and you just have a much more textured understanding of what's going on. And so one way to do it is to record, which is very easy to do nowadays, whether on video or audio or even get transcripts, and just say, right now, I'm just going to listen for the content. What's the information? What's the data? What are the claims that they're making in the conversation? And then a second time to listen through it and say, what's the emotion that's getting either expressed or displayed? What am I noticing in tone? What am I noticing in body language? What am I noticing in volume, etc.? What am I noticing in expressions? And then thirdly, through action, which is, what actions are they taking? Are they repeating themselves? Are they making requests? Are they insisting on something? Are they pushing me in a certain direction, etc.? And so a way to get good at it is essentially practicing through each of those channels and then bringing it back together again, and to look at the interplay. To what extent is the content congruent with the emotion and the action? Are there ways in which it's not congruent? And those are interesting to then inquire into and to say, I'm hearing you say this, but I'm noticing this. What's that about?
This just occurred to me as you were talking, that as therapists, another thing we sometimes do is tune into ourselves and our own reactions as the person is talking. Is that something that you've thought about too? That just occurred to me now. Like, I sometimes look at my own reaction to something as a little extra source of information about what's happening in the dynamic or with the person.
Yes. I mean, I think that everything is in balance. If you are only focusing on yourself, of course, then you're not really that present for the other person.
Not. Yeah.
But I think you're talking about using yourself as an instrument as well, and noticing what is this bringing up in me, and what might that tell me about what I could be learning more about from the other person. I do think that's a great source of information too, as long as you can distinguish that that's you and not the other person.
Yeah, and you're not just dwelling in there all day long.
What is going on for you. Yeah. Exactly. I
love that you mentioned the doorknob moment in the book, which is so well known to all therapists. And for our non-therapist listeners, it's that as a therapist, it's you're 50 minutes into the session, you are saying your goodbyes, they're walking out the door, and they drop this bomb on you, which is pretty much the thing they really should have mentioned in the beginning. It's the major bit of information.
I'm glad that as a therapist, you recognize, that's familiar to you as well. I've heard that from a number of therapists. And I think it's just true for so many of us, even in non-therapeutic situations, where we can assume that the first thing the person says is what they have to say, is what's really going on for them. But really, there's no need to assume that. Like, that's not necessarily true. In fact, often the first or the second or third thing they say isn't the most important thing that's going on in the conversation, but they may be building up the courage to say the real thing, or they may be waiting to see how do we react to thing number 1, 2, and 3 before they decide, are they safe actually saying the rest of the thing. And so in order to get at that, one of my favorite listening strategies is to just simply ask them to say more. What else? Continue to pull the thread to say, is there more? And even in an organizational work situation, I will often say to people, I want to hear what's going on in your experience right now. I want to hear what ideas you have, what suggestions you have. And after they say one, I'll say, all right, great. And what else? And what else? And I'll say to them, I'm going to keep asking you this question until you tell me that's it, I'm good. But usually I can go, 4, 5, 6 rounds. And often they get the ideas get more and more interesting, and the experiences they share get more and more deep and significant the more I ask that question. But if we don't ask that question, we're usually just stuck with the first thing, which chances are isn't the real thing.
Yeah, I think this is actually something that I'm going to take with me as a therapist after reading your book, is just that, is there anything else you want to share, or making time to stop and ask that? Because I think often, maybe sometimes they're avoiding it or something, but often we just get kind of on a certain track. And then by the time there's a potential shift, it's almost like too late or something. And I really want to make sure that I don't keep that. I love
that strategy. You're almost preempting the doorknob moment. You could, to basically say, we could stay on this track, which is great. But before we continue to go down that track, just to check, are there other things that we should also be naming or dealing with or talking about as well? I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, and just to be a little bit more deliberate about that, more aware of that tendency. Because that happens a lot, let's talk about this important thing. And right at the end, it's like, okay, well, now we're going to have to continue that next time we meet because we're out of time. And, it's the old therapist, we're out of time thing.
Right. But you're talking about how you can help, help people get the most important stuff out before you're out of time.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So a lot of your examples are from the corporate world, but as you said earlier, this isn't just a skill for the workplace, that there are some other areas of life. And you mentioned a few times about, the role of a parent and trying to facilitate conversations with our kids. How do you navigate this with your kids? I mean, you mentioned one thing already, which is meeting them on their terms in terms of the timing.
Yes.
How can you help us out for those of us with kids that sometimes are a little reluctant to share?
Yeah. Well, I think another thing that I learned from a therapist friend of mine has to do with how I react when they actually say something to me. And one of the things that he shared with me is a great barrier for kids to really continue sharing is if their parents freak out when they share. And that freak out could be in the positive direction or in the negative direction. And so monitoring my own emotional reactivity. My wife and I are actually dealing with this right now because our son is a senior in high school. And every day at this moment, he's coming back with news of I got into this college or I didn't get into this college or whatever else. And we're both reminding each other, just be receptive and open and warm and not, have strong emotional reactions one way or the other, because that's going to send all kinds of messages back to him about what he can really share with us as well. That doesn't mean putting on a stone face and be completely emotionless, but monitoring emotional reactivity is one that I'm working on right now.
So you have to play it cool a little bit.
A little bit play it cool, and also even when my daughter comes home and tells me she got this grade or that grade on a test, I'm trying to modulate a little bit. So that she doesn't think, oh my God, I have to please dad, or oh my God, dad's so upset with me, or anything like that. But instead just be like, okay, cool. How did you feel about that? What did you learn about, all that kind of, just continue to draw it out of her versus have it be about me and my reactions.
Yeah, I love that.
I'm curious, how does that land for you as a therapist? And do you agree with that advice, or do you, any reactions to that?
I do. I agree with that because I think, like you said, it's not about just, we do have reactions to these things. And it's not like we're trying to pretend like we're unresponsive, but I think that sometimes our own reaction almost, first of all, they feel like they have to emotionally caretake us, which is not what we want. But then also, I don't know, it becomes about us somehow or something.
Exactly.
Like they have a social problem and we get all riled up about it, and it's like, that's not going to make them want to share again next time when all they need is someone who can support them and talk to them. But if they think, oh, mom's really going to freak out about this, I've done that before where I got all in a tizzy about something. I got mad about my kid not getting invited to something. And I think that was extremely unhelpful. Like it just did not make the situation better for my kid. And so, I learned something from that, which is that it's not really about me.
I love your point
right?
that almost can then lead them to focus less on sharing and more on taking care of us, or thinking about how's mom or dad going to react.
Yeah. And I also think, you said this earlier, but we also I find that sometimes we really have to think about the timing with our kids and get them in a space where they're open, because my kids will talk a lot to me about things, but there are certain moments where they say, stop asking me questions.
That's right.
They're tired at the end of the day. I'm annoying them. It's like, I think that being a little bit sensitive to that and not pushing, if you're getting the sense that they're not wanting to talk, just
that's when you have to back off.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. I also find with my own kids that if I'm driving them and they're in the backseat of the car, or even if they're next to me, but we're not face to face with each other, sometimes more comes out. Maybe it's a little bit less confronting. Maybe that just feels a little bit more safe. But I do also think about just, the physical setup as well.
Yeah. It's less intense or something when
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Magical backseat is. Okay, final question here, and this is related actually. You the last section of your book is about building this framework into leadership and life and organizations and that kind of thing. And one of them, and you have a background in education, it's about helping children to also get curious and get really good at this. What are some of the ways, and again, I know there's a lot more to this, but what are some of the ways we can help pass this skill set on to our kids?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is to really help to nurture and amplify their own natural curiosity. Kids just, come out curious. And there's all kinds of research about how many questions kids ask, before they're age 5, something like, 400 questions a day. And then it just steadily declines. And it also declines more in school than at home, which is, something that my own organization is trying to work on and deal with. But if we can look for things that our kids are naturally curious about, and then help to extend that, how might you learn about that? What would happen if we went and asked that, et cetera? Those kinds of things can be ways that we don't even have to give them curiosity because they've got the curiosity, but we can remove barriers and we can just help them do that. So that would be, I would say that's one. A second one is to model the curiosity ourselves. And so to remind ourselves that as parents, we don't have to have all the answers. And in fact, when we say, I have no idea, what an interesting question, we are modeling for them that kind of curiosity, that kind of curious question asking. And even we can take it one step further and say, who could we ask to get an answer to that question as well? And so we're both teaching and modeling the act of, you can not only be curious, but you can actually go ask questions as well. Those are a few, I would say.
I love that. Yeah, just kind of role modeling that and facilitating that and kind of building, like encouraging that curiosity and interest in the world. Yeah.
My favorite quote by James Baldwin is, children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they have never failed to imitate them. And so if we want our kids to do something, in this case, if we want our kids to be curious question askers, we have to give them good role models to imitate.
I love that. Well, on that note, thank you, Jeff, for joining us. Again, the title of your book is Ask, Tap into the Hidden Wisdom of People Around You for Unexpected Breakthroughs in Leadership and Life. So definitely highly recommend checking that out. And where can people find you online or find out more about your work?
They can check out the website, www.askapproach.com, or follow on Instagram @askapproach.
Great. Well, good luck with your book launch, and really such a pleasure to talk with you today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review or contributing on Patreon.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our newsletter and connecting with us on social media.
We'd like to thank our podcast production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.
So, Debbie, you've been doing this podcast for a while. What's the funniest thing that ever happened?
Oh my God. I can't even begin to. Okay. This is not a specific one-time thing, but I do think that there's a lot of behind the scenes moments with the co-hosts where we just kind of lose it with laughter. Sometimes it's a blooper or it's just I don't know. I think we have a lot of fun, and that there are these, I don't know, just these moments where we're doing this thing that's pretty weird and wacky. And this is vague. I know I'm not really thinking of a specific example, but
well, you sent your microphone flying twice while we were recording this co-host intro.
Today,
which
yes.
I am very sad that the recording wasn't running yet, or this would have been so on social media, although you would have become the next internet meme.
True, for sure. But I mean, moments like that, right? You knock over your microphone, you totally blow it, you forget when you're interviewing someone. We just have so many of those little moments, and they're funny.
I'm just reminded of you all interviewed Yael for her Work, Parent, Thrive book, and Jill's French bulldog was snoring in the background. Yeah. It was just, and I was listening to the audio recording, and I was thinking, wait, is there snoring in the background? Is what happened? Did one of the interviewees fall asleep? Now I'm kind of answered my own question.
That was a good one.
Probably shows that it's a good question. Right.
Yeah. But those kind of moments, I think they're the best. You got to find some humor in them because, that's how we make it fun, right?